The Legend of Isla Toubora. The fresh scent of the ocean filled the air as Linda walked along the misty shore. The sun was on its way up, and the fog in the distance drifted just above the ground, connecting with the glistening surface of the seemingly endless ocean. This was one of the finest parts about coming to this place in the early summer. Isla Toubora was so darkly beautiful. There was something eerie about it, something mysterious about the fog that always surrounded the area, and something slightly unusual about the way the water moved, the way it gently rolled in and out of the shore at a steady, consistent rhythm, even when there was no breeze at all. What was particularly strange was when the foamy waves behaved in a way that was entirely different from how the wind was blowing. These things made for a dark, strange atmosphere, but at the same time, beautiful. It seemed to put you in a trance. That's why Linda loved taking walks along the shore early in the morning. It was such a tranquil experience. However, hauntingly beautiful fog and strange water behavior weren't the only things that made Isla Toubora mysterious. There was also a chilling legend that the natives took very seriously. Down beneath the waves, cloaked in the deepest, darkest regions of the salty waters surrounding the island, they say dwells a massive creature. A vicious, frightfully intelligent creature that likes to trick its prey, and apparently enjoys playing with its food. This monster was known as the Toubora Demon. As far as Linda knew, there had never been any reported sightings by anyone other than the natives, and even then there were only a small handful. However, over the years, many people had claimed they'd heard strange, unnerving sounds near the shore after dark. These reports were much more common and also came from non-natives. People who claimed to have seen the demon all stated that it was too dark to fully make out what it looked like, but that its stare felt like that of Medusa's. It gave them the most horrible chill and seemed to entrance them. The legend of the Toubora Demon was without a doubt one of the most popular traits of the island, and was probably the reason it got about half of the visitors it did each summer. Nonetheless, it was only a myth to most people, and was simply something fun to talk about in front of a fire near the shore at night. Linda caught sight of yet another missing person poster blowing across the rocky surface she walked along. It had to be the 7th one she had seen over the course of the 2 days she had been there. All of them were asking people to aid in the search for a missing boy named Yuji Kizahaki, who was native to the island. According to the poster, he had just turned 8 years old, and went missing late one evening after he had gone out to explore near the water. He was last seen entering the opening of a massive rock formation that encapsulated a vast area right by the water. Sometimes the waves in that area would get considerably large and violent, and could pose a serious threat to someone who happened to be in their way and wasn't paying attention. A big, fast-moving tide could certainly roll in and crash down on an 8-year-old boy, drowning him easily. Today was the 4th day the boy was missing, and search parties were now looking for a body. Needless to say, many people believed that it might not have been an accident, but an abduction, rather, by the hellish creature from the deep. Linda was now on her way back to the cabin she and her boyfriend Corey had rented. The sun was almost all the way up in the sky at this point, making things a bit less uncanny. Today was rather gloomy, but still warm and somewhat sunny. The disappearance of that boy must have really had an impact on people, as there were usually plenty of others also walking along the shore in the morning, but Linda had only seen a few passerby. Inside the cabin, Linda sat down on the bed next to Corey, who was still asleep. She hadn't slept much that previous night, as the two of them had stayed up pretty late watching romantic comedies. Linda still wished they would have watched something scary, which she had suggested more than once last night. Although Corey wasn't against horror, he just wasn't as into it as Linda was. "Let's find a movie that has to do with sea monsters or something," Linda had said. Alas, Corey just wasn't in the mood for that. Linda was starting to wonder if he had actually been afraid of watching something along those lines, considering their current location. Linda had been walking outside for quite a while, caught up in the entrancing atmosphere. She was exhausted. She had felt wide awake earlier, but her lack of sleep was evidently catching up with her. She decided to lie down for a while, maybe sleep some more if she could. The if variable in that decision turned out to be a definite when, as she dozed off no more than a minute after her head touched the pillow. Linda slowly came to, finding herself standing in darkness. She felt light, but struggled to move fluently. There was a presence near. It was straight ahead, and getting closer. "What is that?" she wondered, staring into the blackness. She was waiting to see something, anything, that would let her know what was going on. Suddenly, her body began to get even lighter, and continued doing so until she was no longer standing on the ground, but floating in midair. She heard a low, rumbling growl that echoed from every direction. The nature of the sound and the way she was floating made Linda realize that she was submerged in water. She was deep under the sea. Then she caught sight of the presence that was approaching her. It looked like a person, but acted more like a dead body. It was floating, but it seemed lifeless. Its head was facing downward, hiding its face from Linda's view. It spoke. Its voice came in the form of a weak, raspy wheezing that was hardly a voice at all, but Linda was able to understand it.
"My toy. My boat."
Linda felt a massive jolt as the body suddenly screamed at her. The atmosphere around Linda suddenly faded, and the voice that had screamed her name was realized to be Corey's, and was suddenly no longer a scream. Blurry light replaced the darkness around her, and she felt the welcoming sensation of real movement as she stirred around in bed. "You've been out for like 6 hours, Corey said. Linda stretched and grunted. "Come on, let's go out to the water." Linda groaned, turning over and saying nothing. "Please," Corey mumbled from behind. "What are you, a little kid on Christmas morning?" Linda mumbled back. "Babe, you've been sleeping for hours, and I've just been sitting around reading and playing games on my phone. Besides, this is the first time in like 2 years that I've actually woken up before you. You're always the one waking me up. Give me some credit here." "Nice try, Sleeping Beauty," Linda grumbled. "I was out by the water for over an hour this morning." There was silence, and Linda just knew that Corey probably had that face he got when he looked like a little kid who just had his candy stolen. After a few more seconds of trying to stay quiet, she couldn't help but start chuckling. "Oh, come on," Corey moaned, falling back on his pillow. Linda sat up. "We can still go out to the water, but then I want us to go to that little seafood place I was telling you about yesterday. You have to taste that salmon." After getting dressed, Linda and Corey headed out on their way to the restaurant. It was pretty close, and the day had gotten much warmer and sunnier than it had been when Linda was awake earlier. Many more people were now out and about, and the mood felt much lighter. As the two walked, Linda thought about the strange dream she had had. The eerie feeling that had accompanied the dream faintly came back when Linda thought about it. That had to be one of the strangest and most random dreams she had had in quite a while. It just didn't make any sense. Then again, when do dreams ever really make sense? The day carried on as cheerfully as it had started. After Linda and Corey had eaten, they walked around the small town area nearby that was filled with tiki bars, souvenir shops, and various other attractions. Before they knew it, the sun was already on its way down. They were going to leave the island early tomorrow to head back home, so tonight they wouldn't be able to stay up as late as they had the previous night. After they arrived back at their cabin, Corey suggested that they pack most of their things that night so they wouldn't have to rush the following morning. Normally, Linda would have tried again to persuade Corey into watching a scary movie, but she felt a little uneasy. She kept thinking about that dream. It had only been a dream, but it was just one of those dark dreams that sticks with you for a while. They decided to play board games instead. Luckily, Corey had come prepared with 3, and the 2 of them often got competitive when it was just them playing alone, so there was always a chance they would be playing for hours. As it turned out, that's exactly what happened. Game after game of childish competition, they played into the night. Eventually, after Linda had won the same game 3 times in a row, the 2 decided to call it a night. "You can't touch me and my board game skills, Corey." "Whatever, you know that was mostly luck." "Fine, that's what I'll tell you next time you beat me and act like a little kid." After a solid 10 minutes of petty, juvenile remarks between the 2, it was finally lights out. Corey always fell asleep really quickly and slept like a rock. As Linda lay there, she wondered if she'd even be able to fall asleep, seeing as whenever she slept in even a little, she usually had a difficult time dozing off later the following night. The monotonous ticking of the clock on the wall opposite of the bed seemed to echo in Linda's head. Once again, she began thinking about the dream. Minute after minute passed, and Linda wasn't even tired. Frustrated, she eventually sat up. She gently slipped out from under the covers, trying not to wake Corey. Not that he would wake up anyway. She could probably leap out of bed and start running around breaking things, and he'd sleep right through it. She made her way to the window that looked out at the front porch and pulled open the blinds. From there, she thought she saw something out near the water. She cupped her hands around her eyes as she pressed her face against the glass, looking more closely. There was something out there. It looked like a person, and it appeared to be sitting on the shoreline with its back to the cabin, the shallow waves gently rolling in and out all around it. It looked as though it was hunched over, its head drooping downward. Was it just someone who was drunk? Maybe asleep? Linda pondered the possibilities, but none of them seemed to match. There was something odd about this. Something just didn't seem right. Linda began to realize how small this person was. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that it was a little kid. Why would there be a little kid out there all alone? She thought. Then she froze. Could that be? Linda stepped back from the window and just stood there, staring out at the figure. This seemed so surreal. Swallowing hard, she nervously walked over to the front door. She slipped her feet into her sandals and put on her hoodie. Opening the door, she felt the cool air flow in, along with the familiar salty smell of the water. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The figure was still in the same position and wasn't moving. Linda then caught a glimpse of what looked like a small white light, way out over the ocean, hovering in the darkness. The longer she looked at it, the more it seemed to resemble something shiny that was reflecting the pale blue light of the moon. Then she spotted another one, just across from the other. Both of them remained completely still, somehow stuck in solid suspension. Linda began to get a nagging, uncanny feeling that they were somehow aware of her. This was all getting stranger and stranger, and was beginning to take on a supernatural vibe. Linda suddenly felt like she had gone into autopilot. Rushing across the porch as if in a trance, she descended the steps into the rocky sand, quickly heading out to the shoreline. There was no one else outside, except for her. The only other things out here were the gentle breeze, the ominous fog, the broad sound of the seemingly endless ocean water, and the figure looming up ahead. The two light reflections were gone. Linda's pace slowed down the closer she got to the figure, until it was only several feet away. It was a young boy. He was soaking wet and his clothes were filthy. He reeked of something awful. Linda just stood there, wondering if she should call out. Just as she was about to ask if he was all right, he spoke. His voice came in the form of a raspy wheezing that was hardly a voice at all. He said something that made Linda's blood run cold.
My toy boat.
Then silence. A long, terrible silence. He spoke again.
I lost my boat over there by the rocks.
Linda didn't say anything. She just stood there, paralyzed.
My boat. Can you please get it for me? I'm too scared.
Linda slowly turned her head to look at the large rock formation on the left. It was even darker over there, and she couldn't see much at all. But she did see another light reflection. Two more, in fact. They were visible through a large gap in the rocks, floating within the encapsulating formation, inside of a tall, heaping tangle of driftwood and seaweed. Were they the same ones Linda had seen from the porch? How many were there? Once again, they somehow seemed aware of Linda's presence. Linda turned back to look at the boy, who was still in the same position. She finally worked up the nerve to choke out a single question. "Are you all right?" Silence. After about a minute of nothing, Linda began to make her way over to the boy. Indeed, he sported a horrible odor. Had he gotten into something? Surviving each day and night over the course of 4 days? Had he been dwelling somewhere filthy? "Is your name Yuji?" Linda muttered. Still nothing. She walked around to look at his face, but his head was drooping too low, hiding it from view. Linda slowly kneeled down next to him. She carefully reached out her hand, touching him on the shoulder. Still, no response. Linda leaned her head down lower to look at the boy's face, and recoiled in horror. His eyes were bulging out of his head, his tongue like a balloon, swollen out of his horrible, bloated face. He was dead, and he had been dead for quite a while by the looks of it. The pungent, rotten stench now completely filled the air, attacking Linda's senses like an explosion of toxic gas. Linda leaped up, stumbling backwards on the wet, rocky surface of the shore. She turned back around and began running back to the cabin. Things felt much more surreal at this point, and she wondered if she was only having a vivid dream. No, this wasn't a dream. Despite how surreal it felt, Linda still had a clear, wakeful perspective of the situation. She reached the cabin porch and turned back. The dead boy was gone, and the two reflections of light were no longer inside the rock formation. Where the heaping tangle of driftwood and seaweed had been, there was now only sand. Out in the darkness above the ocean, the two reflections of light floated, shining back at Linda through the fog. Then they slowly made their way down into the water. They grew dimmer as they sank deeper, descending farther and farther, until they were gone.